Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I want to talk with you today about the Institutional Review Board IRB Approval Process. Just a quick note though, as you'll find between my and Tim's presentations, there is some overlap. He's going over the Wilkes IRB specifically, and I'm covering the process a bit more generally, and I'm even getting into some history and some of the rationale behind the guidelines and principles used in the IRB process. I want us just to look at a few metaphors. This is the life cycle metaphor, an example from Virginia Tech. You could think of animals or something, flies or something like that in their life cycle process. The next one is the straight and arrow example, as I called it. This is from the University of Southern California, and I show this just as another way to view or think about the approval process. Thirdly, we have the doing the wave example, as I call it, from the National University of Natural Medicine, and I like this one. It looks pleasing to the eye, and it also shows that it's both straight and up and down. There will be ups and downs in this approval process for us at times. It's important for us to think a little bit about the history and clear guidelines and standards for protecting human research subjects. Review board approval so what came out of this convening of the Belmont scientists, but the link leads to a dead page. So should you be interested in viewing the whole report, the whole YouTube video that I reference, you can check out my references at the end of this presentation. The YouTube video, Part 3, the Belmont Report, Basic Ethical Principles and Their Application, provides an old but really informative overview of the history and context surrounding what would essentially become the Ethical Research Bill of Rights and the solidification of the three key principles that guide ethical research. The key question guiding federal and scientific bodies that convened in the 1980s to address standards for ethical research was the following. How would we protect certain groups of research subjects that previously lacked adequate protection? The poor, disadvantaged, ethnic minorities, prisoners, children, the mentally disabled, and the unborn, which is a quote directly from the video. Essentially, what the U.S. Congress needed were clear guidelines and standards for protecting human research subjects. So three basic principles were developed, and you can find them in their entirety on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services website. But they were respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. The first one surrounding the ideas of the moral requirements of acknowledging autonomy of individuals and protection of those individuals with diminished autonomy. Beneficence was an obligation, a sense of doing no harm, and it's rooted in the Hippocratic Oath. Justice is about who ought to receive the benefits of research and who ought to bear its burdens. There are pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages when we conduct research. We move now to the actual Wilkes IRB approval process, but it's important to know what approval actually means, and that's the determination of the IRB at Wilkes that the research has been reviewed and may be conducted at Wilkes University within the constraints set forth by the IRB and by other institutional and federal requirements. And I think it's important to see that although here is the Wilkes process, approval process, it is in conjunction with federal requirements. The two go together, and that would be true at any institution at which you would do research. As we think about the approval process, it's important for us to think about our responsibilities as the principal investigator in our research. The principal investigator is responsible for completing the IRB application and submitting the required materials to the IRB. For research whose principal investigator is a student, and that's us, a Wilkes faculty member must sign designating that they have reviewed this application thoroughly and will oversee the research and acknowledge their role as the principal investigator of record. Regarding the application, it's quite thorough, as you would imagine. It involves an introduction, summary, subject population, procedures, potential risks, potential benefits, compensation, collaborators, conflict of interest, additional required information, and protecting human subjects training. We'll talk more about the informed consent form in just a moment. But in addition, if there are any amendments, renewals, or extensions for your approved research, this must be run by your faculty sponsor. If you make any changes at any point in the approval process, once something has already been approved and you need to make changes for whatever reason, you must include your faculty sponsor as you resubmit things to the IRB. Figure 5 is just a funny way to think about informed consent. Make sure that your informed consent form is in fact informed and is based on consent and not force. I invite you to look more closely at this cartoon. There are several criteria for IRB approval of your research. The risks should be minimized and reasonable. Selection of subjects must be equitable. Proper informed consent must be achieved. Strong plan for data collection and monitoring must be in place, and plans to maintain privacy and confidentiality to the extent possible. The review process will usually take place by the full board review, and in order for research to be approved, the application must receive a favorable vote of a majority of the members voting. 3 outcomes are possible: approval, resubmission, or disapproval. The review notification will come by writing regardless of the outcome. Several guidelines and reminders are helpful at this point. The review and approval process takes at least 2 to 6 weeks and possibly much longer. Research cannot begin without IRB approval. Proposals for funding, however, may precede IRB approval, and this depends on the funding organization. You must go through human subject protection training, and this occurs with the National Institutes of Health certification. When you actually submit the review board application, you must include the supporting documents, and we'll look at that in the next slide. Your last name must be the first word of every file title that you submit to the IRB. Additionally, and finally, you email the application at this link here, at this email address here. The supporting documents are very important to include and to be organized. A copy of the informed consent form must be included. Evidence of protecting human subjects training certification must be provided. A copy of any written test instruments, including questionnaires or surveys and whatnot, must be included. A copy of any audio, video, or other visual materials or pictures used to test or measure responses of participants, and any additional materials that may aid the IRB in making the decision. Several considerations help us as we close out this presentation. Remember, this process can take anywhere from weeks to months, so ask questions and plan well. Ongoing review of IRBs for some research is necessary. It's sort of like school improvement. It never goes away. Review and let others review your application and supporting documents, even for grammar and spelling and things like this. It's very important. Although it seems at times like another hoop to endure through the doctoral process, the IRB approval process really helps ensure that we are doing our jobs with respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And this aligns with the Wilkes IRB mission itself. And it also places us firmly in a like-minded, rigorous community of researchers around the world. Finally, a couple more metaphors for us to look at as we think about the IRB approval process. Success often is circuitous. We do things again and again and again. It's never that straight line that it sometimes looks like. It's squiggly, it's everywhere, going backwards and forwards and sideways. And that's okay, because we can get through it, and it helps us, it grows us, it challenges us.